To begin with, I used to be an English teacher at Leonardtown High School. I graduated from St. Mary's College in '84 and was student teaching right afterwards, and they offered me a job right away because I taught writing.
Ah,
and I immediately became the end all be all of writing across the curriculum. The reason why I could write so well is because I came to St. Mary's College as a music major, and I'd never really written much papers, And I'd already been to East Carolina University for a year and University of Richmond for half a year, and as a science major. And I was here. I never had to write a serious paper, so I got here, and Michael Phelps had me in the music department, and I wrote a research paper that was basically just the history of guitar, pretty much. And he was like, "What is this crap?" And here I was, 25, going back to college. I was 26 at the time. Mm-hmm. And here's these kids that are, 17, 18, and they're like,
old. Mm-hmm.
I felt about that big. And so I made it, when I did student teach, I wasn't planning on teaching. I was playing in a band that was playing like 5-6 nights a week in this area, Annapolis, Washington, and they had to talk me into coming in. A supervisor, Dolores Fleming, black lady, said, "You've done this before," and she came in to observe me, and I said, "No, I've never done this before." And she said, "Well, then you're a natural." And I said, "They're not drunk." And she said, "Excuse me?" And I said, "I've been playing in bars for, a long time, man. I say something to these guys, they all look up, And so I really got engaged with teaching. It was a lot of fun. And so I realized that if I didn't like high school that much, but it's because I was bored all the time and I'd rather be working. And I decided if I was going to take a job there, then they offered me a job from 9 to noon. She said, "Could you get to work by 9? I said, "Theoretically." And she said, "Could you leave at 12 and still do your band stuff?" And I went, "Yeah, I could." She goes, "You want that job?" And I went, "Okay." And so writing literature and writing about literature became really important for me because it was the best way for me to get kids to get engaged in something and then write about it and figure out how to write, And a lot of them hadn't done much writing. So to get into advanced placement, you had to pass a test. You had to be in the upper 80% to pass the test. You also had to write an essay, and that had to be top notch also. And I would accept 12 to 15 students a year. That was the cap, was 15. Mm-hmm. Now it's 35. Mm-hmm. So once they switched it to that, which they did while I was still there, I didn't leave until 2006 and 2008 actually. And so in 1996, I really liked Toni Morrison a lot, and I really liked Mark Twain. And so for summer reading, I gave them Song of Solomon and Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and wrote them a letter and telling them that the class was focused on all these. It wasn't just literature. We were putting it in perspective as far as we went through. So it was American literature, and I write them a letter and say that we'll be following philosophical movements, including Puritanism, Age of Reason, nationalism, racism, romanticism, realism, naturalism, transcendentalism, and modernism, which is then they go, so what is this, a history class? And it's like, you can't separate the two, and you can't separate philosophy from this. So it's all that, this class is all that. And they generally enjoyed it because I would bring in literature that they didn't know anything about, and they'd be like, wow, this is pretty cool, And it'd be like, yeah, so you guys have tricked everybody into doing whatever you want, now trick them into giving you A's, basically. And the people that got into advanced placement were very competitive also. And I tried to make it not competitive. When I came back to school in 96, 97, there was one parent that was up in arms against Song of Solomon. And she wrote this scathing letter about everything that was wrong with it, language, which I have a copy of. And she wrote to, first of all, my department supervisor, which now had changed. It was Deanna Norrid, and she wrote back, as you requested, enclosed as a copy of the procedures involving textbooks questioned by members of the community. I've included a form that can be used to express concerns you have about Song of Solomon. So they say, you know, she says later on, as a result of our conversation, I know that your concerns are very important to you and that you are truly interested in your child's education. I hope that involving you in this process will assure that we are also concerned. Well, what happened was it went to the board, and they looked at it in the middle of all this. I have all these letters to the editor.
From the Enterprise?
From the Enterprise, from the Washington Post, and from the Sun, Baltimore Sun, and actually from the Evening Capital in Annapolis too. And so I just started getting into, like, you know, it says and then I got into other in two Maryland counties, a war over words, removal of books by, you know, and so 2 Maryland counties removed. And so there's all these letters in here. Well, this lady was questioning my decision to use that novel.
Yes.
And on every advanced placement class, test that I saw, that was literature oriented. So it was literature and writing, and then it was literature and, I can't remember what 12th grade was. Anyway, the whole class didn't understand what was going on with this because they didn't read this graphic. They didn't see the big problem with these graphic things that this one parent saw. But as one parent saw it, then many other parents started to chime in. Well, then other people started to chime in about how it was appropriate to teach these kinds of things because it's cutting edge literature. She's been what is it, not poet laureate, but she's a renowned writer who's many awards, and so all these people that were reading this, the ones that got turned onto it and really wanted to look into this would say to me, you know, I never read that novel before. Now all my friends are reading it. These are adults. You know, and I was like, great, okay. So now you're informed. Well, the problem is that the county commissioners and the board only looked at the pages that were questionable. So they didn't put it in perspective at all.
No context.
Right.
Okay.
And so they kept at me about it. But, you know, why are you teaching this and everything? And I was like, you know, she's on the advanced placement list, and I thought this was appropriate. And I haven't seen anywhere in the country where this has been a problem with this novel. And so they had many meetings, and at one, that the superintendent kept sending messages to me to stop talking about Song of Solomon in the classroom. So I did. And but she kept coming back to me because she thought I was. And at one point, Mrs. Jenkins, who was Judy Jenkins, who's a vice principal, called me into her office after school one day and said, I need to talk to you about Song of Solomon. And I was like, okay, what do you need? Because I'd stopped talking about it. I stopped anything related to it. She said, the superintendent wants you to stop talking about it. And I went, I have stopped talking. And you tell the superintendent, if she wants to talk to me personally and not send some messenger. You know, and she was like, well, I'm just trying. I said, no, I don't care. And I was like, this is ridiculous. You know, she sends messengers. And I went, I got to go. And I just walked out. And I went into my room and started washing the board. And she followed me in there a couple minutes later, and she said, are you all right? And I went, no. And she said, David, I don't think I've ever seen you this mad. And I went, I've never been this mad. You know, it's like over this book that I'd say 40% of the people were saying it sucks, 60% at least. It could have been more than that. We're like, what's wrong with this? You know, and she's a Pulitzer Prize winner. You know, that's what I was trying to think of. And her novels are just killer novels. They're really great novels. And I fought this tooth and nail without putting my name into anything. I never sent anything to the newspaper. I never responded to them, you know, calling me. Post called me, oh, come on.
So you remained silent throughout the entire...
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yep. I didn't have anything to say because anything that I said would be misinterpreted, or it would be either taken on one side as, see, or the other side and go, well, he's being, you know. So I couldn't win. And so for once, I showed discretion and didn't respond to it. So one of my teacher friends, an English teacher who was very active in the Maryland State Teachers Association, came to my room and said, "Have you read our booklet on the guidelines and the rules and everything for people, for how the school, how we're supposed to act and how we're supposed to be treated and student everything? It's all in this little thing from the association." And I said, "Nah, I've always looked at the calendar and it though." And he goes, "You should read this." Okay, so he marks a page, and it's Article 11, Academic Freedom, and this is right just before Christmas break, and they were really pounding on me, and I was like, ah. And so he gives me this and highlighted it, and I read it. And it says, "In performance of their teaching functions, teachers shall be responsible to provide students opportunity to investigate all facets, sides, and/or opinions of and about any and all topics and materials introduced or presented, and shall have a special responsibility to provide such opportunity with regard to those which are or may be of controversial nature. Such material presented to students must be relevant to the basic content of the course and appropriate to the maturity level and intellectual ability of the students. The teachers shall further be responsible to permit the expression of the views and opinions of others, and to encourage students to examine, analyze, evaluate, and synthesize all available information about such topics and materials, and to encourage each to form his or her own views and opinions of others, and for the right of individuals to form and hold different views and opinions. The basic content of a course and provisions for its implementations and supervision shall be the responsibility of the board." So then they lay it on, so it's the board's decision in the end. The assignment I made up for them over Christmas break.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Goes, "Consider the controversial nature of this novel, Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. Students are to examine, analyze, evaluate, and synthesize all available information about the topic and materials, and write a personal essay which clarifies their own views and opinions of others, and for the right of individuals to hold different views and opinions." Basically verbatim from the.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, this is a personal essay assignment. Students are to follow formal essay guidelines used when writing the critical analysis essays previously assigned in class." So I sent this to my principal, just tell him this is what I'm doing, and he came back and went, "You're kidding, right?" And I went, "No. Have you read this in our
You showed him the
contract?"
article.
And he said, and he read it, and I said, "I'm obligated to do this. I don't have a choice."
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I mean, if you read this, if I don't, I'm delinquent.
Right.
And he went, "Okay, Flood." Okay, so my students went home with this assignment over Christmas break, and they had to get a hold of the superintendent and anybody in that office that had anything to do with this, all the board members, any teachers that they could get a hold of, or politicians that they, commissioners, So every commissioner, every board member, every person in the superintendent's office was called over Christmas break by each and every one of my students, which was like at the time about 30 students. And because I had 2 classes, and they were livid. They were absolutely livid about it, because my students were like, "So why do you think this? Why can I meet with you?" And talk, they were really professional about it. They did a great job, and it just made people so up in arms that they were like, "This has got to stop." I wasn't making any friends then, and they came back with these great papers. Some of them said, "Nah, this shouldn't be taught."
Mm-hmm.
But most of them said, "Yeah, it should be taught. It should be taught." There's a lot of controversy about it, but isn't there controversy about everything? And they bring up like the Bible, and when it did get taken away, it was removed from the approved list, so it wasn't banned.
Oh,
Okay, banning's different. You're not allowed to have it in the school at all. It was still in the library, so it was just removed from the approved list for advanced placement. And I said, "That's bullshit. You're banning this from." No, we aren't. No.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to go to this meeting where all the heads of, this with the superintendent and all the English heads and everything were there, and they made the decision to not put it on the approved list. And so I said, okay, great, that's great. And I've been in trouble with the administration many times because I usually did what I wanted to and paid for it later. Mm-hmm. And it worked out with kids, but it didn't work out with adults. And my kids were constantly getting better and better at what I was, analyzing literature. They got into it, It was just like, wow, this could be fun, And it's like, yeah, I'm not going to come here and not have fun. There's no way. And that was the key to it, was that they looked at this, all this that came out, and they were like, what are they talking about? And I was like, you don't even know? And they're like, no, well, where was that scene? I said, find it. They talk about it, so find it. Mm-hmm. It's kids were like, I don't remember reading that, and so one of the letters with the original person who brought this subject to board here was, she said that it was completely inappropriate and that students at a high school shouldn't be subjected to such language. And my response was, really, have you ever stood out in the hallway in between classes? It's like you would be very surprised what your kids are hearing, and I stand out there and just go, okay, I gotta go, because it's like they're being, they're not being rowdy too much or anything, but they're using foul language and they're talking about stuff that's like what the novel was talking about, only in a little different way. But it ended up that they got rid of it, and I was in the association, so I asked my rep, who was my lawyer basically, Charlie Purcell. I said, so Charlie, am I allowed to, after this is all over, am I allowed to say what I want to? And he went, yes, David. And I said, you think I should? He goes, I don't think that's going to matter. I think you're going to do it anyway. And I said, you're right, I am. I just wonder what you think. And he said, well, I don't know. So at the end of it, I said, okay, so it's off the approved list. So I recommend, and I reached down, that we take Huck Finn off the approved list also. It has the word nigger in it 186 times. And I did count them. And Catcher in the Rye. We should take this off the approved list. It has words such as fuck in it, shit. I'm being really graphic and open about this because it's like, hey, that's what you're saying about this book, so why not these books? And there were 2 or 3 of them, and they went, well, would you like us to consider them, Mr. Flood? I said, yeah, as long as you're, banning, not approving books, I was pushing the envelope all the time with them. And at the end of it, they listened to what I had to say, but it didn't go anywhere. But at the end, I looked at Charlie as we were walking out, and I said, so was I okay? And he goes, yeah, you were pretty good. It was pretty good. You got him real pissed. But I don't know if you want to, while I was going through this, I got stuff like banned books. If you think we're free from censorship, think again. That's a good one. And books challenged or banned. I don't know if you have these materials or not.
I don't believe we have these exact materials.
Mm-hmm. So I looked in our program of studies and was trying to find out what's the wording in here. And it says, for advanced placement English 11, one of the sentences says, quantity and quality of assigned work will be on the freshman college level and will be evaluated on that basis. And so they should be treated as college students. And no parent would go into a college student's classroom and say, I don't believe you know. Mm-hmm. It's like they're paying good money and they assume that whatever they pick is good, whereas it's just tax money for me. And if they don't like it, I mean, I didn't have the best reputation with administrators and parents that were bullheaded about things, I'm pretty open-minded, but when you start having, no matter what I throw your way, you still have that mindset, and I'm still wrong, then I learned to just go, okay.
Now, I noticed in the 95 to 96, Toni Morrison, 3 of her books were challenged at this time, The Bluest Eye and Beloved.
Yeah.
Did you also ever include those? No?
But I had students read them for research papers.
Ah.
So they would choose Toni Morrison and try to find some way to work a theory into it, and then prove it. But I know this is all dated, but this is all around this date,
Right.
which was
This is all
96,
recent.
97.
Yeah.
And I've got some other articles in here. First, read the book. This is the Washington Post. I write in response to the article concerning Toni Morrison's work, St. Mary's Commissioners back removing Morrison novel from curriculum. Metro, blah, blah, blah. In question, Commissioner's commitment to his own education when he said, I think there's a certain amount of maturity required by students in order to put some of this language in proper perspective. I'm curious to know how Mr. Chesser was able to put his language into perspective for himself after reading only 2 pages of the book. This is from someone in Rockville. So it's like, yeah. So they're responding to this, saying, shame on you. In any of this is a teacher too, in any of my 12th grade English classes, reading 2 pages of a book is not considered equal to having read the entire text. An enjoyable pastime, I think, should be required of any government official who wishes to deny teachers the right to assign a book in their classes. So, and it goes on, saying that, I fail to see, blah, blah, blah. And St. Mary's students are getting a disservice in teaching them to denigrate what they don't understand and giving them, this is an excellent letter. It's like, if you don't understand it, then it's got to be bad, So don't get too close to it. Don't get too close to the tar baby, You'll stick and stay. Toni Morrison holds race up to the light and reflects on the meaning of color. So there were some good articles about that are in here, and actually it used to be the imprint. Oh no, that's the imprint from Leonardtown High School. Yeah, even they wrote a thing about it.
The imprint.
Yeah.
Is that a student paper?
That's a student paper at Leonardtown High School. So got a copy of that with things in it. Now the St. Mary's Today was always tried to focus on what's wrong with people, and not really being as positive as they should. And I forget the spin that they put on this, but it's in here, and I think most of these are cut out and put in sleeves here also. Just more stuff about Toni Morrison, and so I didn't know about this until I came back to work in September or August of '96, and I had to figure out how long this had been going on, and it had been all summer basically. And so the complaint procedures, and I highlighted this: any school employee who receives a complaint about a textbook in use will promptly notify the principal, who in turn will notify the teacher involved, which didn't happen. Like, we didn't nip it in the bud right in the beginning. And these are regulations for reviewing textbooks, questions. And so I highlighted a few things here.
So those are just the regulations for if a teacher has a complaint. Or
You have a complaint, right.
has a complaint.
And a copy of the page that has the academic freedom. So in 1997, then Toni Morrison was invited to St. Mary's College, and this was the year that I had this class, and she was the 20th annual Margaret Brent lecturer. And I went to the lecture and everything, and spoke to her, and you can get this picture now. And then I sat next to her and said, I was the one who got this that had taken off the approved list, and she said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Yes, just because I was teaching it." And she said, "That's great." And I said, "Pretend you're my best friend," which I always say to people. I play music too, so I go see people play, and I go, "Pretend you're my best friend. We've been jamming for a long time." And it was just too funny, because you see the person scooting off to the side.
Yeah.
It's her. It's my supervisor. My supervisor was sitting next to her. And she had to listen to me say, "Yeah, I'm the guy who had this taken off the approved list." And look at Deanna. "Hi, Deanna, how are you?" "Fine, Mr. Flood, how are you?" "Fine. Meeting my best friend here." You know, and she thought it was interesting. Toni Morrison thought it was interesting, but there were a lot of people that really wanted to talk to her, you know, and get her signature. Mm-hmm. So I talked to her for about 2 minutes, and then, which was a long time actually for you know,
book
a long
signings
group.
especially.
And she was like, it was very interesting. She's very interesting, and she took it in stride when I told her that, you know, yeah, it's not on the approved list here anymore. And she said, She didn't comment, but she was like, yeah, she's so used to it, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it was just great to have that happen, though, right after all this, you know, hit the fan, and have all the local newspapers talking about how great Toni Morrison is, and she's coming to St. Mary's County. You know, I'm like, you know, what did she write? Song of Solomon. You know, it's like, did you forget that? Mm-hmm. So I can actually leave you stuff if you want to take, you know, look at it or anything.
No, that would be excellent. And one thing that they've always tried to have us do for this project, we're creating a website. So all this data that you have will be able to be accessed by anybody.
Yeah.
But on the complaint side, the only complaint that was filed went to the superintendent's office?
It went through the right channels. First, I think it went through my principal. Mm-hmm. And then to the superintendent. And the superintendent decided to look into it. But it became a hot issue in the paper for some reason. Something happened. The lady Williamson did write a letter to the editor, and she and her husband did. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple other people. It's not censorship to suggest Song of Solomon is not appropriate school text. Mm-hmm. You know, so there's a number of letters like that. But the original, this guy Mike Williams also was concerned about it. He has a negative, but there are equal amount of positive letters. Mm-hmm. So it
was really a back and forth dialogue with.
Yeah, this is funny because they say you may not have been taught genuine literary analysis. This is written in response to, this is very disappointing that the guy, what Mike Williams said. Mm-hmm. I'm impressed that you responded, which is more than I can say for any of the adults who chose and taught the text. But I found your letter disturbing for what it shows about how you've been taught to deal with intellectual differences of opinion. So stuff like this started coming out, and it's like, wow, that's scathing. You know, it's like they're really getting into his character. Mm-hmm. And so it was pretty hot. And this was December, still. So it was an issue still in December. And so that's when I decided to give them this assignment. Mm-hmm. And man, I got a couple of phone calls like, hey, did you assign this to your, and I went, yeah, sure. And you know, other board members and stuff were talking back and forth, and they hated me, man. They were like, you know, who gives him the right? And it was like, the association does, right. You know, and I'm backed by them with $1 million. You want to fight it? And so I would always push it, but just far enough so that it wasn't like, I'm not going to push it too far. You know, it's like I at least respect the system enough that it's like I can't just try to tear it apart, because I'm not like Trump. I can't rebuild everything myself. You know, there needs to be a village there to do that. And so I try not to ruffle too many feathers on this. And that was the beauty of it, is that I never had to say anything, and I never responded to it. And I started that in the beginning, and then about halfway through it, I thought, man, I should say something. You know, it's like everybody else is coming to my, you know, back me up and everything. And I think I talked to Robin, and he went, no, don't, no. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm doing the right thing by not writing. And he said, yeah, you are. So I've got a bunch of articles and letters to the editor. And then I've got all the papers that, the students that once they wrote a paper, mm-hmm. if they gave me a copy of the paper, then I gave them like 5 points or 10 points on their paper. Mm-hmm. So there's some in here. There should be more papers, but let me see a couple of them. But still, there's a plethora of information in here. So I even looked at how the program of studies, which I looked at earlier. And then I was just looking at, articles. This is Richard Cohen writing about books, and how important they are. And I wonder if this even had it on. No, didn't have it on the front page, so it wasn't too bad. So there is an article in here about Song of Solomon, though.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's interesting. I can't remember what stand the paper took, or if they were just hands off and saying now this has to be analyzed. I can't remember, but I saved it, so it's probably a pretty good article. But you got any questions?
No. A lot of what you were covering, like throughout your entire thing, spiel really covered a lot of these questions that my partner and I come up with. But I think one thing that's always interesting, especially from a historical standpoint, is, so I guess the question would be, do you still feel the same way now after all that time has passed?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if I were back in the classroom, I'd find something else that was akin to that, And I had them reading a lot of stuff. Their eyes were watching God. Have you ever read that?
No.
That's Zora Neale Hurston, who was a black woman who wrote in the early 20th century, and inspired Alice Walker and Toni Morrison and stuff. She was just an incredible writer, and she died as a broke and as a cleaning somebody's house, basically. And she was one of the best writers of her time. So it's, at one time Zora Neale Hurston she was invited to all the social events, in Harlem and stuff like that, and even with white people, and she just would captivate people, and then it ended up she died as a maid. So it's kind of weird. Stuff like that. But that inspired Toni Morrison for sure. And I really have yet to read a Toni Morrison novel that I didn't like. So it's it's one of those things where that wasn't just one novel that I thought was pretty good. I thought it was essential to read that because of Huck Finn was trying to find his identity in a lot of ways. And so Milkman in the novel Song of Solomon was trying to find his identity also. And so what happened was he went down south. And his family was well-to-do, had money, and he wanted to get away. He couldn't. He didn't feel like he could find his identity, and so he goes to the south to look up his roots. And there's this one scene where he's in a diner, in the really early morning, and there's a couple other guys in there, and they start riding him a little bit about
guitar, right?
Yeah. And they start talking about. Sex and how it's different in the north and the south, and they use some pretty crude language, but that was the one page that was and that page is in here. You can see it blocked out where they blocked out all the words, but it's pretty obvious what the words were. But people just react to things so weird. Before they make a decision before they've even analyzed it. And this was a good thing for my students to see also. It's okay, so you analyze this, you looked at it. How many of you think that these people that want to get rid of this book, this is the one where they...
No, they blacked out the words.
Yeah, it's just too funny, man. It's it's very obvious what the words are. But my students learned a lot about being closed-minded and just how bold people can be to denigrate someone else, for the language that they use or something where it was actually appropriate. I mean, that's the way they talk, and that's what makes it such a great novel. And she did that quite well. So did Zora Neale Hurston. So did Alice Walker. There was a time when I was reading. My mother used to call me and ask me, "What kind of book would you like me to send?" And I kept asking for different things, Zora Neale Hurston and Alice Walker. And at one point she said, "Do you read anything besides black women?" And I went, "They're the most honest ones out there. They're the best writers. It just seems like to me. Back in the '90s, it did. I have a little different taste in literature now, but not much. But for teaching it, there's a whole different deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, well, if they can start to get on this level, Song of Solomon, and that was my goal, was to make kids so good at analyzing things that once they got into college, they go, where'd you go to high school? You know? And that's what happened. I would get kids that would come back and go, like years later, and say, man, I am kicking ass in graduate school. And I did in undergraduate school. And I'm like, really? Why? And they said, because I can write. You know, any curriculum. And I'm like, come talk to my students. Mm-hmm. And then they'd be like, they won't listen. Didn't somebody talk to our class too? And we didn't listen. You know, because there's a lot of great literature out there that you can pigeonhole like that because it's so graphic. And I mean, the Bible's, you know, mm-hmm. You know, so it's just funny to have people questioning what their teens should be, you know, made aware of or exposed to. You know, when you're talking like, you know, there's heroin out there and there's OxyContin and all this bad stuff, you know, and it's like you're worried about what they're reading here, and they're trying to develop some kind of perspective on things, you know. It's just like it was bad. This was a battle that I really wanted, but I really didn't want, because it was just too exhausting. Because everywhere I go, people, that's all they wanted to talk about. It's like, mm-hmm. You can't talk about it really. I would say my lawyer says I shouldn't talk about it, which is bullshit, but you know, it always sounds good. They say on TV, right? Mm-hmm. So I never had to really jump into a heated discussion with anyone about it. And the only reason why I got mad is because the superintendent wasn't coming to me personally and saying, David, you got to stop doing this. And for me to personally be able to say, I did. I stopped. Mm-hmm. You know? But it wasn't until she kept sending these messages that I signed that paper over the break. I was like, fine. You want me to put an end to this? This will put an end to it. And it was beautiful. It was so beautiful because it was like, yeah. I think my principal and the superintendent were getting calls all over the holidays, because when I got back to school, they were like, I hope you had a good holiday. I was like, I did. So at the time, it seemed like everything was just so closed-minded, and that nobody really wanted to open up with this. But it was just the people that had power that were like that. The rest of the people that read this were like, wow, what's wrong with it? I thought it was pretty good. And I ran into people all the time, and no one would have read that novel if they hadn't seen it in the newspaper like that. Mm-hmm. You know, and you go, wow, what's wrong with that? It's like, oh, it's really crude and rude. I think I'll read it. You know, which is funny. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why Huck Finn is so popular, is that it's, you know, it's in the dialect of the time, you know. And Mark Twain overused the N-word on purpose, you know, to show just how easy it is for them just to use that term, and just how, you know, after a while it starts getting to you as a reader. It's like, man, he sure does say that a lot in this book. And it's like, yeah, he does, because he wants you to go, that's too much, man. That's way too much. And by the end of it, you're tired of reading that. Because I used to have students that would read out loud and they just wouldn't read that word. And I'm like, that's fine. Say slave. Just say that. Right. So they were offended by certain things, but they weren't offended by this novel, but the adults were. That's what was weird, was that I had to keep the student in my class too. And he was a good student. I didn't treat him any differently than anybody else, because this was between me and the powers that be. You know, and it wasn't really between me and the powers that be. It was between the literature and the powers that be. If I got personal on it, I would have made a lot of enemies on this. I would have made a lot of friends also, but I don't want to get personal about it. It's literature. Right. You know, it's like one book. Couldn't believe it.